Washington beat Oregon yesterday, 36-33. This was legitimately one of the best games I've ever witnessed in my life. Growing up in rural Georgia, of course, a young JP knew where Seattle was, didn't ever think he'd be watching football games in Seattle, certainly didn't think he would be attending football games in Seattle. I got to tell you something. Look at this. If you have the privilege of watching on YouTube right now, I got in the building before it was open to the public, and I took the iJosh, and I just tried to capture what this place looks like. It's like a screensaver, especially if you go into what I firmly believe is the steepest upper deck in all of sports, right up there with Dodger Stadium and the Sky Dome. I went up there and I shot the field, totally tranquil, and then off in the distance, you've got the sun coming up, you've got the water, sailgaters are on their way in, and then we had a knockdown, drag-out war on that football field. So juxtapose how quiet and peaceful and serene it is with just a few hours later, we got Oregon missing a field goal at the end of regulation. Here's more footage courtesy of the iJosh. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see it. If you're listening on podcast, picture a missed field goal, and then there we are, once again, in the middle of another field storming. It seems to always be in this corner of the end zone we're standing as well. Coach Quinn, close behind me, had to make sure she didn't get trucked. It almost happened a couple of times. People mistake her for a student a lot. And it was wild. Such a wild scene. 7 lead changes in this game yesterday. Bo Nix, Michael Penix lived up to, if not exceeded, all of the hype around this game. Here's what's wild about it. Maybe you feel this way, maybe you don't. You've got your own preferences. When you talk to me about instant classics and great football games, there have to be a combination of a couple of things for me. I want high-level offense, but I also want high-level defense, and you may think to yourself, well, you can't have that. I would argue we got it in this game. We had 956 total yards, but there were multiple key defensive moments in this game. There were multiple turnovers on downs. That doesn't happen just because you trip over your shoelaces. There have to be defenders. There has to be defense being played at least somewhat of a reasonable level. This was unbelievable. The noise in Husky Stadium yesterday afternoon rivaled just about anything I've witnessed in the SEC. And I want to pause because you think I'm lying, but most of you haven't been there. And I hadn't been there until yesterday, so I didn't believe it. Cooper Pategna walking up and down the halls, talking to me about Washington Husky Stadium. I just thought it was purple propaganda. P squared, as Meemaw would call it. It wasn't. It unbelievable, ear-piercing noise. And it wasn't just on the first drive. Anyone can get loud on the first drive. It was sustained. It was all the way throughout the day. It's how I picture the Metrodome used to sound when the Twins were in the World Series, which is a painful memory for some long-suffering Braves fans. Man, those people made that an extremely hostile place to play yesterday. It was right up there. Like Tennessee, when they played Alabama last year, it's the loudest I've ever heard any venue. This approached that at times yesterday. And you're working with 30,000 less in attendance and open end zones. Unbelievable how loud that place was. So, what's everyone want to talk about? It seems to me like everyone wants to talk about Dan Lanning's decision-making, and he's being questioned, and whether he should have gone for it on this fourth down, whether he should have kicked a field goal on that fourth down. Hey, on this show, we like to talk about winners first. So I'd like to ask you, does anyone want to talk about the team that put that heat on Oregon? Does anyone want to talk about what put them in position to have to decide whether to go for it on a number of those fourth downs? Oregon ran for 204 yards yesterday, and it wasn't good enough. Bo Nix, 10 yards per completion, wasn't good enough. 10 of 16 on third down wasn't good enough. Nix was 20 of 24 for 221 just in the second half, and that was the side of the ball that lost. That wasn't good enough. Why? Because Washington's that good. That's why. Washington and Michael Penix had a career day, and what was interesting was when you came into the game, you always wonder, are you going to be able to live up to your reputation against quality competition? Same thing I wondered about Dillon Gabriel against Texas the week before. Well, he did. They did. They lived up to it and then some. For the course of the regular season up to yesterday, here's a Post-it pop stat. Penix was throwing for about 400 yards per game. He threw for 316 yesterday. Plenty good enough. Plenty good enough. Rushing, they didn't have a 100-yard rusher in any game this season. Dylan Johnson, 20 carries, 100 yards. Stats and Info dutifully tells me that's right at 5 yards per clip. Plenty good enough and then some. Points per game, they were scoring about 46.8 per game. They scored 36 yesterday. Plenty good enough. What's interesting also, if you go back and watch the prediction I did, is I predicted Oregon to win. No confidence. We didn't bet on this. It was a very, very low confidence prediction. But I said, I assume Oregon will score 38. They didn't. You want to know where not kicking those field goals comes in. You want to know where not converting fourth downs comes in. That's the difference between scoring into the 40s and not converting and being in the low 30s. Washington was incredible yesterday. You know you're watching NFL talent. Like Adunze is an NFL lock, first-round type talent at receiver. I think the country found that out yesterday. I think most people who have watched him already know, and he's not the only one on that roster. He's just the premier guy in that receiver room. 8 receptions, 128. Troy Franklin is that for Oregon. 8 receptions, 154. So all the big players in this game went off the way they were supposed to. And everyone's now talking about whether there's going to be a rematch between these teams. I'll get to that. The reason why I'm skipping the Mio on the desk, we're just going straight coffee tonight, is because, well, number one, this game took place in Seattle, so we had a long way to come to get back for tonight's show. The other reason is I made an executive decision, and I decided not to sleep on the flight home last night. I wanted to go back, not watch the condensed game. I wanted to go back and watch the entire game. And so thanks to the folks at United Airlines for just providing copious, dangerous, dare I say borderline illegal amounts of caffeine to keep me awake, but also for getting us home safe and allowing me to come to a couple of conclusions. Number one, I don't think that there were losers in the grand scheme of things in this game yesterday. Probably my net reaction was I'm a little bit more to moderately more impressed with both teams than I was coming in. And you know I was already pretty high on both of them. I had Oregon top 5. They're not going anywhere. They're not going to drop out of that. I would imagine the JP poll may have some of you in shambles Tuesday night. If you weren't ready for Notre Dame to be rated higher than USC, even though they had 2 losses to USC's 0, you may not be ready for what comes Tuesday night. But you know what I've noticed? Anytime there's questionable decision-making from coaches, okay, anytime there's questionable decision-making, in-game strategy style stuff from a coach, everyone wants to have their gavel moment. Like everyone just wants to speak in definitive terms. This guy's an idiot, or this guy's a genius. This guy's a failure. This was a terrible decision. This was a great decision. 99% of the time, there's shades of gray around all that. So you saw the game yesterday, and if you didn't, go back and watch it. I would encourage you to. Instant classic. Dan Lanning had some decisions to make. Oregon had some decisions to make. They are very aggressive by nature, very aggressive. That's their MO. They've done it sometimes to their success, sometimes to their detriment. I think they're willing to live with that. I have this weird thing where when coaches make decisions and they don't work out, people fill my inbox as if I endorsed the decisions and they expect me to answer for them. I don't have to answer for anything Dan Lanning or anyone else did yesterday. They do. He did. We'll play it in just a second. But I don't have to answer for that. I was watching just like you were, but you guys probably come at me because you know I'm a little bit more apt to lean towards benefit of the doubt towards coaches' decisions than your average member of the media, because I'm not your average member of the media, nor do I claim to be. No, my philosophy on this show has always just been, I trust that I don't know what they know. And that not just talking about football acumen. I've always respected the amount of prep and attention to detail that goes into getting ready for a game. And also the situational awareness in getting ready to play an opponent, I think would boggle most people's minds. That doesn't mean you couldn't make a wrong decision. It just means you're equipped with a whole heck of a lot more information than I am, or someone with a laptop on their knees is, when it comes to making decisions on whether we're going to go for it on 4th down, what look we get on 4th down. So anyway, I'm on CBS Sports HQ yesterday talking to the esteemed Hakeem Dermish after the game. He asked me, what'd you think about those decisions to go for it on 4th down? I said the only one I really didn't care for was the one before the half, because I just didn't think it made sense. And sure enough, after the game, Dan Lanning got asked 9 different ways from Sunday about it. Here's what he had to say.
I'll always go back and evaluate myself, right, and say, okay, what can I do different? That being said, from probability standpoint, how we felt about the looks that we were getting, we felt like we had a chance to have success in both situations, really, or all the situations today where we went 4 on 4th. I'll certainly go back and evaluate myself, and it's about adapting. The game's about adapting and figuring out where you can be better. You take one of those field goals early on, right, and we are looking at probably a little bit different situation.
So obviously everyone's got an opinion on whether you should go for it on 4th down. My whole thing with the way I look at that is I've never liked the people that enjoy benefit of the doubt. I've never been a fan of people who get benefit of the doubt on their side. Why should I say this? I'm kind of backspacing because I know I'm probably going to clip this later. Here it is. Here it is, Jesse. Here it is, Colin. I have never appreciated people who wait to have benefit of hindsight on their side before they judge a decision. In other words, the decision's made, and then you got folks that go, uh-oh. And then they wait to see whether it works out or not. Then they go, terrible or gutsy, ballsy. Well, you're not really judging it properly. Now, if you could hit the pause button when he makes the decision and say, I don't like this no matter if it works out or not, or I'm a fan of this no matter whether it works out or not, I'm okay with that. Most people don't do that. Some people in our profession don't do that. So here's the thing. No, I would have preferred they kick a field goal at the end of the half. The other stuff, that's personal preference. That's philosophy. I could not care less. I appreciate it. I respect it. Here's what they're not doing. They're not flipping a coin on that Oregon sideline. They know who they are. If you don't like it, you don't like it. If you do like it, you do like it. I don't really think they care much. But I was looking at it from the perspective of he thinks he's got the better team. Like, he trusts his players. That's really what it came down to. They think they've out-recruited and maybe out-athlete Washington, and they trust their guys to come through on 4th down. They didn't. They didn't execute on 4th down. Washington did. So I want to keep going back and emphasizing this. They're not playing against air, guys. Like, Washington's allowed to try. Those folks were allowed to scream their heads off. They did, and they did. In both cases, affirmative yesterday. And that's why they didn't get it done. They didn't execute because Washington kept them from executing. Now, in the Oregon circles, they'll probably look and say, if we do what we're supposed to do, it doesn't matter what Washington does. That's how competitors should think. I'm just telling you, it panned out the way it panned out. There's no gavel to drop on the desk. There's no one dude's an idiot, one dude's a hero. Like, if Oregon converts one of these things, we're talking different. It may even have been a 55-45 proposition edge Oregon, and the 45 just happened to run the day. Could be totally different if they play again. The biggest takeaway from me, aside from that, is it used to be that if you were 37 years old and you were a head coach for the first time, you were probably at Toledo. You were probably at Boise State. Because back in the day, Boise State was not viewed as a premier program. My point is, you were learning the lessons out of the spotlight. Modern college football has evolved to the point where a lot of guys get their first shot at Georgia, Kirby Smart. They get their first shot at Oklahoma, Lincoln Riley, Ohio State, Ryan Day, or in this case, Oregon, Dan Lanning. Wonderful. I'm all for it. It doesn't mean you just skip the learning process, or what I call the bloom phase. The bloom phase is when you're becoming whatever you're going to become, which is hopefully just a beautiful flower with petals, in this case, multiple championships to your name. But it doesn't magically just occur that you learn all the lessons that your predecessors had to go off and learn out of the white-hot spotlight. No, you still got to learn them. So, for instance, when it comes to game management, if Dan Lanning could go back and do it over again, well, maybe he does kick the field goal to go into the half. You know what that is? It's a lesson learned. It's nothing more. It's nothing less. It's not the dude's an idiot, and then if he did it the other way and it didn't work out, he's not aggressive enough, which, by the way, a lot of folks speaking out of both sides of their mouth today would absolutely have vocalized, whether it worked out one way or the other. So, I mean, if I were him, I wouldn't really care about that. What I'd care about is do an honest self-assessment of me, which he talked about in his post-game presser, and look at numbers, because I know what the math says on that stuff. The math says that doesn't work out. The math says that's not the right move. I've always been very fascinated at how differently analytics are applied sometimes in football as opposed to baseball. In baseball, you know you've got 162 games. In football, you know you've got 12. And in college football, you can't afford to lose virtually any of the games. And so how much does gut come in? How much does momentum in game come in? How much does momentary feel come in and outweigh analytics? And you know what? You get paid a lot of money to make those decisions. A lot of folks last night, when the stadium was emptying, we're talking about whether we're going to see this game again. I don't know. Maybe we will. I would not jump ahead on that. Pac-12's way too competitive this year to just assume, well, that was round one. They're saying the same thing in the Big 12 right now. OU, Texas. Oh, that was round one. Hey, maybe it was. I will tell you this. I wouldn't assume anything, but I do think there's separation in the Pac-12. It's just not really where maybe the odds makers thought it was going to be. The odds makers installed USC as the preseason favorite. USC is not the first or second best team in that conference right now. We'll talk about the Trojans in just a second, actually. Oregon and Washington, in whichever order you want to put them in, are the best teams out there. Not only that, I think there may be some distance that's starting to form between number one, number two, and the rest of the pack, but it's not so insurmountable as to be upset proof. And each of them have several challenging games remaining. The updated odds to win the Pac-12, Washington number one, Oregon number two, USC number three, pretty wide gap, and then it's Oregon State, Utah, Washington State, UCLA. There was a portal showcase for the Pac-12. This game was a transfer portal showcase. You would have thought USC Colorado was that because of how those rosters have been constructed. I think Washington, Oregon was the transfer portal showcase. If you think about where Bo Nix was a couple of years ago, he's down at Auburn. He's been left for dead. Michael Penix is at Indiana. Can't stay healthy. Turnover prone. Dude's left for dead as far as the national conversation is concerned. And they hop in the portal and they head west and they go to Washington and Oregon respectively. And you find out the players were not trash at all. Maybe in some cases their surroundings were, or maybe in some cases their development was, or maybe in some cases they just didn't have the right system. But I look at this, and it's a testament, and it's a lesson to be learned for dozens of other guys in the sport. Just because it's not working out somewhere doesn't mean it's not going to work out. Okay, with Bo Nix and Michael Penix Jr., they could have sat there and wasted away at Auburn and Indiana and gone on and sold insurance. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but these dudes have Sunday potential about them. And it wouldn't have been realized had they not transferred. So I know everyone wants to look at a guy who leaves a program and says, oh, he's taking the easy way out. Sometimes the easy way out is the smart way. And by the way, it's never easy leaving a program. It's not as cut and dry as that. Sometimes it's a real challenge to leave a program that you committed to and you thought you were going to spend the next 3, 4, 5 years of your life there. Both of them made the right decisions. Both of those staffs have made the most out of it. So credit to both teams. What a showcase they put on yesterday. May very well not be the last time we see them play. And if they play again on that Friday night in Las Vegas, that is Pac-12 championship game night, consider me a viewer.